The roar of the crowd echoed through the Galactic Arena, a seething mass of frenzied alien beings, their eyes glinting with a primal thirst for bloodshed. High above, massive holographic screens projected images of the combatants poised to enter the fray. But today, all attention converged on a new face, a nameless warrior whose moniker, Specter, flashed across the displays. The crowd sneered, convinced this was merely an early loser, a fleeting amusement before the true champions took the stage. Images of legendary fighters from the past, those who had crushed weaker foes without mercy, flickered on screen, reinforcing their skepticism like a galactic decree. The arena's lights flickered as Specter emerged. A hush fell over the masses for a fleeting moment, only to erupt into thunderous laughter. Not a single creature in the audience saw him as a threat. Far smaller than the towering warriors who typically dominated the arena floor, Specter's unassuming form hinted at no hidden power. Whispers of disdain rippled through the stands, laden with contempt and mockery. Across the ring stood his opponent, Korgath, a mountain of a figure with muscles rippling beneath steel-hard scales, his smirk revealing jagged, predatory teeth. Korgath didn't even deign to glance at Specter for him. This was a brief performance to appease the bloodthirsty throng. Korgath slammed his fists together, unleashing a thunderclap that shook the cold stone floor of the Galactic Arena. The sound wasn't just a display of brute force, it was a declaration of war, a message to his opponent that the figure before him was nothing more than a fragile insect about to be pulverized. "You send a human here?" Korgath bellowed, his voice a grating, icy rasp, like stone grinding under immense pressure, reverberating through the vast expanse. The crowd, a chaotic blend of hundreds of alien species, each more bizarre than the last, roared with fervor, their mocking laughter mingling with ecstatic shouts. To them, this wasn't a fight, it was a spectacle, a preordained slaughter crafted to sate their savage appetites. They eagerly awaited the moment Korgath, one of the arena's most feared gladiators, would rip the puny challenger named Specter to shreds, paving the way for a worthier bout. But Specter didn't respond. He stood at the center of the ring, his gaze calm to the point of near lifelessness, hands hanging loosely at his sides, his stance oddly relaxed before a titan like Korgath. His silence wasn't born of fear or surrender, it was a state of absolute focus, a stillness brimming with latent power. The crowd didn't see it. To them, Specter's lack of reaction was proof of weakness, a sign he had nothing to counter Korgath's colossal shadow. Yet in Specter's eyes, there wasn't a flicker of doubt. He observed, cataloging every minute detail. The way Korgath shifted his weight to the left before striking, how his scales flexed with each breath, the way his massive muscles strained as if to burst through their armored casing. These weren't the eyes of a man facing death, they belonged to a tactician, a soldier hardened by countless battles, surviving not through raw strength but through cunning. The fight's bell rang, its sharp chimes slicing through the crowd's clamor, signaling the start of a drama they were certain would end in seconds. Korgath didn't disappoint, at least on the surface. He charged with astonishing speed for his size, his enormous fists crashing down like twin sledgehammers, aimed at Specter with the intent to crush him in a single blow. The force was enough to shatter granite, and the floor quaked as it landed. But Specter was no longer there. He darted aside, swift and fluid as a phantom, leaving Korgath's fists to smash the ground, sending shards of stone scattering through the air. A faint cloud of dust rose, briefly obscuring the crowd's view, and their laughter faltered for a split second. They didn't grasp what had happened to them. It was the luck of a doomed man, a desperate bid to cling to a few more moments of life. Specter didn't pause to savor the moment. He kept moving, evading Korgath's follow-up strikes with uncanny precision. Each of Korgath's blows carried devastating power, yet they never touched him. Specter conserved his energy. He didn't swing back, didn't posture to prove himself or answer the crowd's taunts. Instead, He maintained distance, his feet gliding in a dance-like rhythm, every step calculated to minimize risk and maximize efficiency. To the untrained eyes of the spectators, he looked like prey scrambling to escape, a weakling dodging to delay an inevitable end. But the truth was far different. Specter wasn't just surviving, he was analyzing, measuring every facet of his foe. Korgath's speed, the force behind each punch, the way he reacted to a missed strike. Korgath, fueled by mounting rage, began to lose control. He roared, his bellow echoing like a cornered beast, his bloodshot eyes blazing with frustration. His strikes grew more powerful but sloppier, lacking the precision he'd once prided himself on in past victories. Each miss sent tremors through the arena floor, debris raining down like shrapnel, forcing a few front-row spectators to shield themselves. The crowd's cheers turned to jeers, their initial excitement souring into irritation. "Finish it!" a tentacled creature shrieked from the stands. "Crush that human!" another voice snarled, dripping with scorn. They didn't want a prolonged fight, they craved blood, the swift destruction they'd paid to witness. But Korgath, despite his overwhelming might, was tiring. His breaths grew labored, sweat seeping from beneath his scales, dripping onto the floor in tiny, glistening beads under the arena lights. He wasn't used to chasing an opponent in the past. Every enemy had fallen to his first blow. Specter remained silent. He didn't need words to prove anything. His quiet was a weapon, a means to keep his mind razor-sharp and focused while Korgath drowned in his own fury. He noticed Korgath's breathing falter, how he leaned too far forward with each swing, exposing vulnerabilities his scales couldn't fully conceal. Those were tiny gaps in Korgath's natural armor too small for most fighters to exploit, but to Specter, they shone like daylight. He didn't rush. He knew time was his ally, that every missed punch drained Korgath's strength and deepened the crowd's doubt. Then, in a moment of total abandon, Korgath lunged with all his remaining might. His arms rose high, muscles taut, poised to deliver a decisive blow he believed would end it all. The crowd held its breath, anticipating the fatal instant. But this time, Specter didn't dodge. He stepped forward, unflinching, his right hand flashing upward like lightning. A single punch struck Korgath's ribs, a small, almost imperceptible hit amid the chaos. Yet Korgath's roar of agony drowned out every sound in the arena. He staggered, clutching his side, eyes wide with shock and pain. The crowd gasped, their shouts dying, replaced by stunned silence. Specter stood tall, his gaze icy and emotionless. "I've seen enough," he muttered, barely audible to himself, a declaration that the prelude was over and the real battle was about to begin. That moment wasn't just a physical strike, it was a manifesto. Specter had turned mockery into doubt, and doubt into awe. He didn't need to shout or flaunt his strength, his actions spoke louder than words. Korgath, once a symbol of invincibility, now knelt before a human they deemed feeble. And in the chilling silence enveloping the arena, a truth began to dawn. Specter was no ordinary fighter, and this battle wouldn't end as anyone had foreseen. After landing that fateful blow to Korgath's ribs, Specter didn't linger to bask in the crowd's stunned stares or the oppressive silence gripping the arena. He surged forward, fast as a whirlwind, his speed defying every expectation the spectators and even Korgath could muster. His feet moved with surgical precision, each step a piece of a plan etched in his razor-sharp mind. This was no longer a probing opener, it was the moment Specter revealed his true nature, a warrior who didn't survive by luck, but by intellect, skill, and an iron will. Korgath, still clutching his side in agony, tried to roar and reclaim his momentum. He swung a clumsy fist at Specter, but it was far too slow against his current pace. Specter tilted aside, the blow grazing his shoulder by mere inches, and before Korgath could retract his arm, Specter was already at his flank. A barrage of strikes rained down, each targeting weaknesses he'd spotted earlier. Joints unprotected by scales, nerves buried beneath tough hide, and the narrow gaps between Korgath's natural armor plates. These weren't flashy, overpowering blows like Korgath's, but they were terrifyingly precise, each one serving a clear purpose: to weaken, to paralyze, to bring down. The sound of cracking bones rang out starkly in the arena's stillness, blending with Korgath's pained groans. He flailed in desperation, his swings wild and futile, each move exposing the exhaustion of his massive frame. Specter didn't relent. He moved like a specter indeed, flickering from left to right, his fists a blur too fast for the naked eye to track. One strike hit Korgath's knee, buckling his leg. Another drove into his throat, where the scales thinned, reducing his breaths to feeble wheezes. Korgath, once the nightmare of every arena foe, collapsed to the floor, trembling in agony, his bloodshot eyes now reflecting only confusion and defeat. The crowd, once rabid for a slaughter, sat frozen as statues. The mocking laughter had vanished, replaced by a heavy, almost suffocating silence. They couldn't believe what they saw. A human, a species they'd always dismissed as frail and inferior, had toppled Korgath, the icon of might and brutality, without so much as a scratch. The commentators, who'd spewed venomous jabs at Specter from the start, fell mute, their microphones dead in their grips. No one dared speak, for any words now would ring hollow against the undeniable reality unfolding on the arena floor. But the fight didn't end there. As Specter straightened, his cold gaze sweeping over Korgath's motionless form, a low hum sounded from the arena's highest tier. There, a group of cloaked figures watched with unnerving intensity. They weren't mere spectators, they were members of the Galactic Council, the puppet masters behind the arena's every move. Their eyes, shrouded by the darkness of their hoods, seemed to pierce through Specter's every motion. They'd anticipated a different outcome, a one-sided massacre where Korgath would effortlessly crush Specter, reinforcing the galaxy's belief that humanity had no place in this vast cosmos. But Specter had upended their predictions. He hadn't just survived, he triumphed, and that victory carried a weight far beyond a single bout. Specter turned, poised to leave the ring, his steps calm as those of a man who'd completed his task. But at that instant, the massive steel doors on the arena's far side screeched open. The lights dimmed, giving way to shadows spilling from the entrance. Heavy footsteps echoed, slow but menacing, like the pulse of a death machine drawing near. The crowd held its breath, sensing a sudden shift of chill, almost stifling aura flooding the arena. This was no longer part of the usual entertainment. It was something bigger, deadlier, and entirely beyond their expectations. From the darkness emerged a colossal figure. Twice Korgath's size, its body melded living flesh with cold metal, its sharp contours carved as if from unyielding steel. Its crimson eyes glowed in the gloom, not the light of life, but of a machine programmed for annihilation. The whine of servo motors accompanied its every move, a mechanical growl like the gnashing teeth of a steel beast. This wasn't a gladiator like Korgath, it was a hybrid, a product of cutting-edge tech and the Galactic Council's ruthless ambition. The crowd, seasoned by countless bloody spectacles, felt an instinctive dread rise in their chests. They knew this thing stepping into the ring wasn't here to fight, it was here to kill. Specter halted, turning to face this new foe. His eyes remained cold, but for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed them, not fear, but heightened wariness before a threat he'd never encountered. He clenched his fists, muscles tensing beneath his simple garb, ready for whatever came next. He understood that his clash with Korgath had been a mere warm-up, a trivial test compared to what the Galactic Council had in store. The creature before him wasn't a random challenger, it was a statement, a lethal gauntlet thrown to probe his true limits. And deep in his mind, Specter knew this fight was no longer just about survival. It was a war between humanity and the universe, between one man's will and the arrogance of those who styled themselves lords of the galaxy. The crowd, now utterly silent, dared not cheer or jeer. They sensed that what was about to unfold would eclipse every battle they'd ever seen. The Galactic Council, from their lofty perch, kept watching, their gaze fixed on Specter. They didn't just want to see him fight, they wanted him to fail, or to prove he was what they sought. But Specter didn't care for their motives. To him, this wasn't a game or a test. It was his war, a war to prove humanity wasn't weak, that they could stand firm against any cosmic threat. And as the hybrid stepped closer, its red eyes locking onto him, Specter drew a deep breath. The true fight had begun. As the hybrid emerged from the darkness, the arena floor trembled beneath its ponderous steps. The hiss of servo motors mingled with the scrape of metal, crafting a symphony of death that resounded through the Galactic Arena. The crowd, already hushed after Specter's victory over Korgath, now shrank back in primal terror. The creatures know, the machine's crimson eyes blazed like twin hellfires, devoid of life or emotion. This wasn't a gladiator like Korgath, driven by honor or pride. It was a creation with one purpose: destruction. Specter stood still, his gaze fixed on this new enemy, fists tightening. He sensed its menace not just in its size or strength, but in the cold, unfeeling nature of a machine that knew neither pain nor hesitation. There was no starting signal, no bell or announcer's call. The biomechanical beast lunged with horrifying speed, faster than any living thing Specter had faced. Its first strike was a punch from a massive metal arm, aimed at his chest with force enough to punch through steel. Specter sidestepped, his reflexes honed by years of combat saving him by a hair's breadth. The floor cracked where it struck, stone shards flying like bullets, forcing a few front-row spectators to shield their faces. The screech of metal against rock pierced the air, and Specter felt the chill draft as the steel limb narrowly missed him. This wasn't an opponent he could face head-on like Korgath. Its power dwarfed any organic foe, its metal plating seemingly invulnerable. Specter countered instantly, refusing to let the machine seize the offensive. He targeted the joints of its metal arm, hoping for a weak point, a swift, precise punch channeling all his strength into one spot. But when his fist connected, a dull clang rang out, and a jolt of pain shot up his arm. The machine's armor didn't budge, not a scratch marring its surface. Specter stepped back, his breathing steady, but his mind racing. This was unlike anything he'd encountered. It had no nerves to strike, no muscles to wear down. It was a pure machine, built to endure and eradicate, with no obvious flaws for him to exploit. The battle swiftly became a test of speed and stamina. The machine pressed its assault relentlessly, each blow faster and fiercer than the last, as if programmed to escalate until its foe broke. A sweeping strike from its steel arm forced Specter to leap, landing just in time to dodge a second punch that followed. The floor crumbled further under the machine's terrifying might, dust clouding the air and obscuring the crowd's view. Specter kept moving, evading each attack with pinpoint accuracy, but he knew mere defense couldn't last forever. The machine didn't tire, didn't falter. It wasn't bound by the biological limits that had undone Korgath. Without an effective counter, he'd soon be cornered. From the highest tier, the Galactic Council watched with frigid focus. Their cloaks swayed faintly in the ventilation breeze, but their hooded gazes never wavered from Specter. They said nothing, showed no emotion, yet the tension in their postures betrayed their anticipation. This wasn't a random bout, it was a trial, engineered to push Specter to his breaking point. They didn't just want him to fight. They wanted him to fall or to reveal something greater he hadn't yet grasped. Specter felt their stares pressing down on him, an invisible force alongside the tangible threat before him. He didn't know what they sought, but he knew this clash held stakes beyond mere survival. Dodging another strike, this time a stabbing thrust from a blade-sharp steel arm, Specter shifted tactics. He stopped attacking head-on, focusing instead on observation. He tracked the machine's every move, every servo whine, every crimson flash in its eyes. Though powerful and tireless, it was still a machine, and every machine had a pattern, a logic to its function. Specter began to see it, a tiny pause, almost negligible, between each strike, a mechanical rhythm in how it pivoted or raised its arms. It wasn't fully autonomous like a living being, it followed programming, and programming always had flaws. To test his theory, Specter experimented. He slowed his movements, deliberately exposing a gap in his guard, baiting the machine to strike a certain way. As predicted, it swung in a familiar arc, repeating the exact blow without variation. Specter sidestepped, not far but just enough, watching its next move. The machine pressed its sequence, unchanging. It didn't learn from errors or adapt to his shifts. This was the flaw he needed. It wasn't smart, just a tool driven by rigid code. But exploiting it was no simple task. Its strength and speed remained lethal, and a single misstep could cost him his life. Enough. A cold voice boomed through the arena's speakers, halting the fight. The biomechanical beast froze mid-strike, its raised steel arms stilled, its crimson eyes dimming to darkness. Specter stepped back, breathing even, but mind still churning. He didn't relax, didn't drop his guard. This could be a ruse, a council ploy to test his resolve. From the high tier, a cloaked figure descended, their robe billowing with each deliberate step. The crowd held its breath, silent as the figure entered the ring. Their voice rang out, icy and emotionless. You've proven yourself. But this arena is just a stage. Greater battles await. Specter didn't reply at once. He stood there, his sharp gaze scanning the figure, probing their intent. The biomechanical beast wasn't the final challenge. It was a piece of a larger scheme the council had prepared for him. He felt it in their words, their stares from above. This wasn't a fight for the crowd's amusement. It was a trial of fate, a test to see if he was what they sought. And as the figure drew nearer, Specter knew the real war against the destroyer from the shadows had only just begun. Specter stood motionless, his steely gaze locked on the cloaked figure who descended to the arena floor. Their words, greater battles await, lingered in the air, carrying a gravity he couldn't ignore. The crowd remained breathless, their silence no longer awe but peak tension, as if they sensed what was coming transcended every fight this arena had hosted. The biomechanical beast, though deactivated with its crimson eyes extinguished, stood as a grim reminder of the Galactic Council's might. But Specter had no time to dwell. Before he could demand answers, a piercing sound cut through the stillness. Alarms blared across the arena, lights flashing wildly before plunging everything into darkness. Panic erupted among the spectators. Screams and stampeding feet thundered as thousands of alien beings shoved toward the exits. But the arena's massive steel doors, once open to welcome the masses, slammed shut with a resounding clang. Desperate pounding mingled with cries, yet no escape appeared. Specter turned, his eyes adjusting swiftly to the dark, scanning the chaos. He didn't care about the crowd. Their survival wasn't his burden now. What he needed was clarity from the figure before him, who seemed to know more than they'd let on. What's happening? Specter asked, his voice low and sharp, slicing through the din like a blade. But before the figure could respond, the ground beneath him shook violently. A massive explosion roared from deep below the arena, cracking the stone floor, sending dust and debris flying. Specter held his stance, but his eyes snapped to full alert. This wasn't planned, not a council test. The cold composure on the figure's hooded face began to crumble, a flicker of panic breaking through. They turned, muttering urgently into a wrist communicator, but a second blast drowned out all else. From the arena's distant shadows, a new shape emerged. Taller than the biomechanical beast, its body was a grotesque fusion of metal and flesh, an indescribable horror. Its crimson eyes didn't just glow, they burned, like twin furnaces devouring all light. Its steps were heavy, each one quaking the ground, and as it drew closer, Specter realized this wasn't a council creation. It lacked the mechanical precision or crafted design of the prior machine. This was chaos incarnate, a twisted blend of tech and life warped into monstrosity. Its hiss came not from motors, but from something deep within, like the growl of a beast trapped in a steel cage. "They found us," the figure whispered, their voice trembling for the first time since appearing. Specter whipped toward them, his gaze cutting like a knife. "Who's found you? What is this?" he growled, but the figure didn't answer immediately. They stepped back, hands shaking as they gestured to the guards behind them. Yet even those soldiers, armed with cutting-edge weapons, couldn't hide the dread in their eyes. They knew this approaching thing was beyond their control. The creature didn't wait. It charged with terrifying speed, faster than any machine or being Specter had faced. A colossal metal arm swung at him, but this time he didn't fully evade. He rolled aside, feeling the icy rush as it nearly struck him, then sprang up, yanking a broken metal rod from the debris-strewn floor. He drove it hard into the creature's arm joint, hoping to slow it. The clash rang out sharply, sparks flying, but the creature paused only briefly before resuming its assault. The rod snapped in Specter's hand, and he retreated, his breathing growing heavier. This wasn't an enemy he could beat with standard tactics. It had no clear weaknesses like Korgath, no rigid programming like the biomechanical beast. It was something beyond his comprehension, a true destroyer, unbound by logic or physical limits. Specter felt it in every strike, not the precision of a machine, but the chaos of a storm, blending brutal strength with unstoppable speed. The arena shook again, harder, as another explosion erupted from below. Walls cracked, steel and stone raining down, driving the crowd into a frenzied scramble. Specter glanced back, seeing the council figure attempting to flee with their guards, but he wouldn't let them slip away so easily. He darted forward, blocking their path, his voice low yet commanding. "What have you done? What is this thing?" The cloaked figure halted, their eyes meeting Specter's through the shadow of their hood. "We didn't make it," they said, voice quavering but clinging to calm. "It came from outside, from a darkness we can't control. We thought we could use you to face it, but it arrived sooner than we expected." Before Specter could react, the creature roared, its bellows shaking the air, and charged again. Specter spun, gripping the remaining metal shard. He didn't know what this thing was or why the council feared it, but one thing was clear: he couldn't run. The arena might collapse, the crowd might perish in panic, but he wouldn't be prey. He lunged not to confront it head-on, but to lure it deeper into the arena, where he could use the terrain to his advantage. The ground kept trembling, but Specter's resolve didn't waver. He wasn't fighting for the council or the crowd, he fought for himself, for humanity, and for a truth dawning on him. The darkness had risen, and he was the only one standing between it and total annihilation. As the monstrous creature charged, Specter didn't dodge on instinct as before. He stood firm, feet rooted to the quaking floor, clutching the broken metal shard, his last weapon. The creature's roar hit like a sonic wave, rattling the air, but he didn't flinch. His eyes sparked not with fear, but with resolve. He knew facing this thing with raw strength alone was futile. It wasn't just stronger than Korgath or the biomechanical beast, it carried an unpredictable chaos, a fusion of warped tech and primal destructive instinct. But Specter wasn't a brute. He was a warrior of the mind, and even in this maelstrom, his intellect remained as sharp as a blade. He rushed straight at the creature, not to strike directly. Instead, he raised the metal shard, blocking its massive swinging arm. The collision screamed through the air, sparks flaring in the dark, briefly lighting Specter's stoic face. The block couldn't fully stop it, its power was too vast, shoving him back several steps, his boots skidding on the shattered stone. But that was his aim, a moment to observe, to feel its rhythm. He realized that, despite its strength and chaos, it wasn't entirely erratic. Its crimson eyes weren't just light sources, they were its control hub, emitting faint signals he sensed in its every move. Specter fell back, baiting the creature deeper into the arena. The crowd still screamed in panic, but he tuned them out. The noise was mere backdrop to the plan forming in his head. He knew this arena wasn't just a flat stage. Beneath it lay a complex web of power conduits and cooling systems, details he'd overheard from guards during his pre-fight captivity. If he couldn't defeat this thing with might, he'd turn the arena itself into a weapon. He darted through a narrow corridor, its floor cracked from prior blasts, the creature's heavy steps pounding behind, shaking the walls. The arena kept collapsing around them. Steel chunks fell from the ceiling, dust cloaking visibility, but Specter didn't slow. He leapt over a chasm, landing on a stone ledge near a massive power conduit, an old, rusted pipe still humming with the raw energy that fueled the arena's lights and machinery. The creature charged, undeterred, and Specter activated an emergency panel he'd spotted nearby. A shrill whine erupted as raw energy burst from the conduit, a maelstrom of electricity engulfing the creature. Its metal plating smoked, sparks flying fiercely, its roar warping into a distorted screech as if its internals were overloading. But it didn't fall. It staggered, its crimson eyes flaring brighter, as if the storm only enraged it further. Specter frowned. He'd hoped this would end it, but he'd underestimated its resilience. He vaulted to a higher ledge, watching as it roared and lunged again. In that instant, he caught a critical detail. When its red eyes flared, its movement sharpened, as if they were its power source or command signal. If he could destroy or disrupt them, he might tip the scales. In a bold move, Specter leapt from the ledge, aiming the metal shard at the creature's left eye. He timed his jump as it swung, using its own momentum to amplify his strike. The shard plunged deep into the glowing socket, sparks erupting violently, and for the first time, the creature howled in pain, not a mechanical growl, but a living sound, as if something within still felt. It stumbled, clutching its eye, and finally collapsed amid the arena's rubble, smoke rising from its twisted form. The crowd, fleeing in terror, suddenly erupted in cheers. Their cries shifted from mockery and fear to awe, reverence for a warrior who'd achieved the impossible. Specter stood there, breathing hard but eyes still piercing, the broken shard dripping black ichor from the creature. He ignored the cheers to him. This wasn't a triumph to flaunt. He turned to the council figure, standing nearby, their gaze a mix of dread and admiration. "If this is your enemy," Specter said, his voice low but resonant over the noise, "I'm not fighting for you. I fight for Earth, for humanity." He tossed the shard to the floor, its clang against the stone a proclamation. The arena's lights went out completely, darkness swallowing all, but in the final moment before the blackout, Specter's eyes blazed not with fear or doubt, but with unbreakable will, a vow that he wouldn't stop. He didn't know where this creature came from or why the council feared it, but he knew this was just the beginning. This arena, with all its arrogance and brutality, was a mere stage in a grander war, one he hadn't chosen but wouldn't refuse. As darkness consumed everything, Specter walked on, not to flee, but to prepare. His legend was born here not as a council pawn, but as a champion of humanity, ready to face any shadow daring to threaten his world. And deep in his mind, he knew the next fight wouldn't just be for survival, it would be destiny. The moment humanity rose to claim its place in the boundless cosmos.